48 hours. That's how long it took China to move 90 warships, 100 fighter jets, and thousands of troops into position around Taiwan. Not a hypothetical exercise, not a distant threat. This happened recently in 2025. The People's Liberation Army just conducted Joint Sword 2025C, the largest military drill surrounding Taiwan since the 1996 Taiwan Strait crisis. Warships formed a complete naval blockade. Fighter jets penetrated Taiwan's air defense identification zone from every direction simultaneously. Beijing called it a stern warning. Taiwan called it a rehearsal for invasion. And every defense ministry from Tokyo to Washington watched the footage and started recalculating their assumptions about Chinese military capability. Because this wasn't just another drill. This was China demonstrating it could choke Taiwan without firing a shot. The Eastern Theater Command deployed forces across all domains. Maritime blockade in the Taiwan Strait, air superiority operations overhead, cyber attacks on communications infrastructure, and coordinated missile strikes simulated against key targets across the island. 7 days of continuous operations. That's the timeline China sustained this pressure. Most military exercises last 2 or 3 days. Joint Sword 2025C ran for a full week with intensity that never decreased. Ships rotated in shifts. Aircraft maintained constant presence. Ground forces on the Fujian coast remained at elevated readiness throughout. Taiwan's Ministry of Defense tracked 153 PLA aircraft crossing the median line of the Taiwan Strait in a single day during the drill's peak. That's more than double the previous record set in 2024. The Shandong Carrier Strike Group positioned itself off Taiwan's eastern coast. That's a big deal because it cuts off the island's Pacific access. Taiwan's eastern ports, the ones furthest from mainland China and historically considered safest for resupply, were effectively isolated. China just proved it can surround Taiwan completely. Not theoretically, actually. And the Trump administration's response? A carrier strike group deployed to the region, but it arrived after the drill concluded. Too late to deter, just in time to observe. Now this is where it gets interesting. Joint Sword 2025C was the third iteration of this specific exercise series. Joint Sword 2025A happened in January. Joint Sword 2025B in March. Each one larger, longer, and more complex than the last. China is drilling invasion scenarios on a quarterly basis now. That's the new normal. Every few months, Taiwan wakes up to warships forming blockade patterns and fighter jets overhead. The psychological pressure alone is huge. Normalize the threat. Exhaust the defenders. Make invasion preparations indistinguishable from routine operations. Taiwan's annual defense budget is $19 billion. China's officially reported military budget is $236 billion. The real number, according to Pentagon estimates, exceeds $450 billion when you include hidden expenditures on weapons development and paramilitary forces. That's a 24-to-1 spending advantage at minimum. Of course, population disparity makes it worse. Taiwan has 23 million people. China has 1.4 billion. The PLA has 2 million active troops. Taiwan's military has 215,000, including reserves. The numbers are just cruel. But what those figures don't show is Taiwan's geography. The Taiwan Strait is 130 kilometers at its narrowest point. Shallow waters, strong currents, limited landing sites. Only 14 beaches on Taiwan's west coast are suitable for invasion, and all are heavily fortified. China would need to move hundreds of thousands of troops across that strait while under fire from missiles, submarines, and air defenses. Then establish a beachhead, secure a port, and sustain logistics under constant counterattack. That's why Joint Sword 2025C focused so heavily on blockade scenarios. China doesn't need to invade if it can starve Taiwan into submission. The drill was a complete maritime quarantine. No ships in or out. No aircraft except those China permits. Taiwan imports 98% of its energy and 70% of its food. A successful blockade lasting just weeks could cripple the island without a single amphibious landing. Sadly, the international response to this blockade is legally ambiguous. Is it an act of war? Is it a customs enforcement action? How do you respond without triggering a larger conflict? Beijing knows this. That's why blockade scenarios dominate recent PLA exercises. The Eastern Theater Command also tested coordinated strikes during Joint Sword 2025C, military terminology for simultaneous missile and air attacks on critical infrastructure. Command centers, air bases, ports, power stations, communications hubs. Taiwan's Defense Ministry reported simulated strikes on 27 key facilities. The goal here isn't just destruction, it's sort of decapitation. Eliminate Taiwan's ability to coordinate defense in the opening hours of conflict. China has positioned approximately 2,000 ballistic and cruise missiles within range of Taiwan. DF-16 with 800-kilometer range. DF-21 designed specifically for striking ships. DF-26S that can hit Guam, where U.S. forces would stage from. The missile inventory is deep enough to sustain high-intensity strikes for weeks. Taiwan has Patriot missile batteries and domestically produced air defense systems. But the math is ugly. China can fire more missiles in a day than Taiwan can intercept in a week. Overwhelming attacks beat any defense. That's the playbook. Which brings us to Fujian. China's third aircraft carrier launched in 2022 and entered sea trials in 2024. Unlike the Liaoning and Shandong, which use ski jump launches, the Fujian features electromagnetic catapults. Same tech as the US Navy's newest carriers. That means it can launch heavier aircraft with more fuel and weapons. The range expands. The Fujian can launch 30 to 40 aircraft per day compared to 15 to 20 for older carriers. It's expected to reach full capability by early 2026. And guess where it will deploy first? The Eastern Theater Command, right across from Taiwan. China will have 3 carrier strike groups operational simultaneously within 2 years. Add in the Type 055 destroyers, the most advanced warships China has ever built, and you're simply looking at a navy that can challenge US presence in the Western Pacific. The Type 055 carries 112 launch cells. That's more than the US Navy's destroyers. Every cell can hold anti-ship missiles, land attack cruise missiles, or air defense interceptors. 8 of these destroyers are already operational. 4 more are under construction. China is building a navy specifically designed to keep the US out during a Taiwan crisis. That's so clever, but come on, we all know hardware alone doesn't win wars. You need training and coordination. That's what Joint Sword 2025C was testing. The PLA conducted live fire exercises with the Navy, Air Force, Rocket Force, and cyber warfare units all operating under a single command structure. Ships received targeting data from satellites. Aircraft coordinated strikes with ground-based missiles. Cyber operations disrupted communications simultaneously with physical attacks. This is integrated warfare. Every domain supporting the others. The kind of complexity that requires years of training and dozens of exercises to execute effectively. And of course, China has been running those exercises relentlessly. Since 2024, the PLA has conducted major drills around Taiwan every 3 to 4 months. Each one tests a different scenario. Blockade, invasion, quarantine, strike campaigns. Taiwan's military calls it cognitive warfare. Normalize the threat until the population becomes desensitized. Make the idea of conflict inevitable so resistance seems pointless. President Lai Ching-te's administration responded by extending mandatory military service from 4 months to 1 year and increasing defense spending by 15% in 2025. Taiwan is also accelerating domestic weapons production, including anti-ship missiles, drones, and coastal defense systems. But let's be real, production timelines matter in this world. Systems entering service in 2027 don't help if conflict happens in 2026. The United States approved $19 billion in arms sales to Taiwan over the past 3 years. Harpoon missiles, HIMARS rocket systems, F-16 upgrades, and Abrams tanks. But deliveries are backlogged. Some systems won't arrive until 2028. Taiwan is racing against the clock, and Xi Jinping knows it. Chinese state media published commentaries during Joint Sword 2025C, emphasizing that reunification is inevitable and that separatist forces will be crushed. Clearly, the language is getting sharper, the timelines more explicit. Xi has previously stated that the Taiwan question cannot be passed down from generation to generation. He's 72 years old. His current term extends to 2027. If he seeks another term as expected, he'll be in power until 2032. The 2025 to 2030 window is what analysts call the period of maximum danger. China's military modernization will peak. Taiwan's defenses remain incomplete, and U.S. attention is divided across multiple global crises. That convergence is what makes Joint Sword 2025C so big. It's telling the world that China has the capability and willingness to move from exercises to operations with minimal warning. 48 hours. That's how long it took to mobilize 90 warships and 100 aircraft into blockade positions. That's also how long the U.S. would have to respond before Taiwan is completely isolated. 2 days to decide whether to intervene in a conflict that could escalate into great power war. Japan is watching this closely. Japanese bases on Okinawa are within range of Chinese missiles. Any Taiwan crisis immediately becomes a Japan crisis. Tokyo conducted its own military exercises back in May 2025, coinciding with Joint Sword 2025C. Island defense drills, air defense readiness tests, coordination with U.S. forces stationed in Japan. The message was pretty clear. Taiwan's security is linked to Japan's security. And if Japan enters the conflict, U.S. treaty obligations automatically trigger. That's how a regional crisis becomes a global war. If you notice, South Korea faces similar calculations. The Yoon administration has strengthened ties with Taiwan despite Chinese pressure. Seoul knows that if Beijing can forcibly reunify Taiwan, it validates similar actions elsewhere. The PLA Navy now conducts regular patrols beyond the first island chain. That's the line connecting Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines. Chinese submarines operate routinely in the Philippine Sea. Surface groups transit through the Miyako Strait into the Pacific. This is simply power projection. China is demonstrating it can operate freely in waters the U.S. has dominated since 1945. But wait, what most analysts missed about Joint Sword 2025C is the timing. May 2025 coincided with the conclusion of Taiwan's annual Han Kuang exercises. Those are Taiwan's largest defensive drills, designed to test readiness against invasion. China waited until those exercises finished, then immediately launched Joint Sword 2025C. That's psychological warfare. Taiwan exhausts itself preparing for invasion, then immediately faces a real mobilization that looks identical to the scenario they just trained for. Do you scramble your forces again? Do you assume it's just another drill? How many times can you mobilize before fatigue sets in? China is testing Taiwan's decision-making under pressure. And today, 6 months after Joint Sword 2025C, the pattern has become undeniable. The PLA conducted another major naval exercise in the Taiwan Strait in September 2025. Smaller than Joint Sword 2025C, but involving 40 warships and coordinated missile drills. Taiwan's response was more muted. The international media coverage was minimal. Fatigue is setting in. That's exactly what Beijing wants. When the real operation begins, will anyone believe it's different from the dozens of drills that came before? Will Taiwan mobilize in time? Will the U.S. respond fast enough? The question isn't whether China can invade Taiwan. The question is whether it can do so at acceptable cost while deterring U.S. intervention. And Joint Sword 2025C suggests China believes the answer is yes. Every drill brings China closer to readiness. Every exercise refines tactics and identifies weaknesses. And every iteration normalizes the idea that conflict over Taiwan isn't hypothetical anymore. It's a question of when, not if. Taiwan's defense ministry released a white paper in October 2025, acknowledging that China now possesses the capability to launch a sudden decapitation strike with less than 24 hours warning. That's half the previous estimate from 2024. The window for response is collapsing. the margin for error is disappearing. And at the time of this video, the strategic landscape around Taiwan has fundamentally shifted. What was once deterrence is now preparation. What was once posturing is now capability. And what was once unthinkable is now inevitable unless something changes. China spent 3 decades building the military tools to reunify Taiwan by force. Joint Sword 2025C was the proof that those tools are ready. Now the only question is whether Xi Jinping will use them. But I want to hear from you. Do you think China will actually attempt to take Taiwan by force in the next 5 years? Or is this all deterrence theater designed to pressure Taipei into negotiations? Drop your answer in the comments below. If you like this type of breakdown, hit that subscribe button. I cover geopolitics that actually matters. And check out the next video here.